1998, a new corporation was founded. Its mission would be to organize all the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. It estimates it will take 300 years before it reaches that goal.
Successful companies start with very audacious goals, and there's no question that the Google organizing all the world's information and making it useful was an audacious goal. And we started with the web, but we see our mission as much more than just the web. We see it as really all of the way we communicate, the way we think, because there's so much of it.
Google may have started out as a simple search engine, but today with applications like Android, Chrome, Wave, Picasa, Google Apps, YouTube, and Google Ocean, and now even its own smartphone, it's become an internet powerhouse. This technological tsunami pours forth almost daily from its development teams located around the world. In the process, Google has become a global vacuum cleaner of digital data. It handles an estimated 20 petabytes of data every day. That's the equivalent of 130 billion photographs or 5 billion songs on an iPod. It also deals with more than 1 billion searches per day, and those searches leave a digital footprint of every person visiting the site.
Well, one of the interesting things about Google searches is it really is a database of intentions. It is an incredible collection of what you are thinking any given moment based upon what you're searching for, based upon what you're writing in emails. And any institution who has access to that can have power over you or potentially adversely affect you.
Do you know what this might be? Does anybody know what that is?
Google founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page.
Wow, okay. I didn't really realize what it was when I first saw it, but this is what helped me see it. This is what we run at the office that actually runs real time, and every one of those rising dots represents probably about 20, 30 searches.
Their ultimate goal is to make Google into an all-knowing entity.
So this session is supposed to be about the future. So I thought I'd talk at least briefly about it. And to do the perfect job doing search, you really have to be smart. In fact, the ultimate search engine would be artificial intelligence. And so that's something we work on.
It is somewhat ironic that they use an image of the rogue computer HAL from the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey when they are promoting such a benevolent message.
Partly, we want to make the world a better place.
If I ruled the world, every day would be the first day of spring.
In just over 10 years, Google has become one of Silicon Valley's biggest and most unconventional players. In that time, it's cultivated an image of a large but benign presence. That public perception is changing. When Google began to scan and digitize millions of books, authors and publishers responded not with hurrahs, but lawsuits alleging copyright infringement. Not long after Google News was launched, Google became the target of condemnation by the print media, which accused it of destroying their ad business and being responsible for plummeting circulation revenues. Or with Google's YouTube site, the music and television industries see a threatening competitor undermining their traditional methods of making money. And when Google started photographing streets, it outraged privacy advocates. Wherever or whatever Google expands into, it always seems to be accompanied by disruption and upheaval. And whenever controversy does arise, Google falls back on a corporate motto that was born out of an early Google employee's aversion to corporate speak.
Having come from Intel, kind of had the I don't want to work at a big company idea in the back of my head. And so I was interested in something that would be a little bit more provocative and a little bit more interesting and maybe make people a little bit uncomfortable. And so just sitting there in the meeting, I was just trying to think of something interesting. And so what popped into my mind was just don't be evil.
When I came in, I thought this was a joke. I thought that it was just a way of marketing within the company. And in one day, I was sitting in the room, and I'll never forget, We're having a discussion about advertising, and one of the engineers named Ron pounds his fist on the table and says, "That's evil." And all of a sudden, conversation stopped. It was as though everyone had jumped around the table and hid underneath it. And all of a sudden, it focused the conversation on whether this particular change was positive or negative for customers. We ultimately did not make the change for that reason.
It's not a bad motto, but it's misplaced because it gets increasingly difficult to say that one is not evil when thinking about the scope of different activities that service providers are involved in. It's no longer just search.
The search engine Google was born in that hotbed of technological innovation, the computer science department at Stanford University. Larry Page and Sergey Brin met as grad students in 1995. They had much in common. Their fathers were both college profs, and their mothers were scientists. Both were born in 1973. Both grew up with and loved anything to do with computers.
Our PhD program is very selective, but it's not like when they showed up the first day, I said, "Oh, this is the smartest person I've seen in my life."
Hector Garcia Molina was one of Sergey Brin's advisors, working with him on some data mining problems.
The one thing that stood out about Sergey was his age. When I got him here as a PhD student, he was 19 years old. So that was the main thing that stuck in your mind, was when you saw him as this just very young kid who knew a lot and was very smart.
Sergey Brin, born in Russia, was the math prodigy who loved swimming and gymnastics. Larry Page was the inventor, looking to change the world.
At some point, I don't know exactly when, they connected and started working together on the search engine.
They created their earliest search engine from off-the-shelf computer components, some of which they begged and borrowed from the university. And after they maxed out their personal credit cards, they came up with some ingenious solutions to their limited...
And then Larry discovered that he could get a better deal by buying the individual disks without the cases. And they built their own machine, and they got more storage for the same amount of money.
With a structure made of toy building blocks and their secret algorithm sauce, which they called Backrub, they cobbled together a revolutionary new search engine.
One could immediately see that the ordering of the pages was substantially better than what AltaVista was providing.
In the mid-1990s, AltaVista, like the majority of other search engines, looked only at text, ranking the results based on the number of times a keyword appeared. Larry and Sergey's search engine was far more sophisticated, with a mathematical algorithm that looked at the number of links to and from internet sites. The more links, the higher the rank.
The first search I ever typed into Google was Canadian exchange rate, and it gave me exactly the right information that I ever could use about the Canadian exchange rate and so on. And I was, I hate to use the word blown away, but I was blown away by the fact that I could find exactly what I wanted so quickly.
I think what they realized is that working on it in the context of a university research project didn't give them the scope and the scale that they really needed to make it work. So they said, well, let's take a leave. Let's go off, do a company, get it working, and then we can come back and finish up the research.
Larry and Sergey were preparing to leave Stanford to start up their search engine company, which by this time they registered as Google, a misspelling of a mathematical term for one with 100 zeros after it. Meanwhile, they continued to participate in the computer science program.
They had presented some work they had done on a search engine, and naturally, given my interests, I wanted to be part of it.
Google had its very first employee, Craig Silverstein, a fellow PhD candidate.
So there were three of us at the beginning, and it seemed like forever that there were three of us. We cared a lot about culture fit, and there were some people who we refused to hire, even though they seemed technically to be very qualified, because they just did not have the personality to work well with us.
The three Stanford postgrad students opened up corporate headquarters in that cliché of Silicon Valley, a garage. The company began to expand.
I joined in January of 1999, which was a few months after they had started. There were 4 other people at the company, including Larry and Sergey at the time, and they were renting half a house from someone who was still living there and who is now a vice president at Google. And the computers, everybody was working in offices or in bedrooms, if you will. And the garage was included, and I believe we had a printer there, we had a ping pong table there, but the whole company was not living in the garage.
We totally worked out of a garage, and I made sure that we did. It was maybe one day a month, or one day every 2 months, but I made sure that every so often we'd go out into that garage, and we would do some work there. Well, I want to be able to tell people times like this that we started in a garage. And so for the record, we started in a garage. It's just in a garage that had rooms in a house attached to it.
As Google outgrew its garage, it moved corporate headquarters into a regular office space in downtown Palo Alto.
We were in Palo Alto back in those days, which is like a restaurant town. My goal was that we would go to a different restaurant every night. We'd eat out dinner all the time. We'd eat out lunch all the time, in fact.
The company was expanding quickly, and soon they moved again. But with few restaurants around this new location, Larry and Sergey decided that it would be more efficient and more cost-effective if they had their own kitchen with their own chef. The one who was chosen had on his resume a stint cooking for the band, the Grateful Dead.
They offered me shares in the very beginning, and I was very reluctant. You know, I talked to my dad about it, and I was like, Pop, these guys want me to give them money for these shares in a company that isn't public. And he's like, it's a scam. Don't believe him. Don't you give him a dime.
Unlike other search sites, the Google homepage was clean and efficient, free of annoying banner ads and pop-ups. Larry Page and Sergey Brin watched as their search engine Google became more and more popular. But that engine still wasn't translating into real money, and they had no viable business plan to make Google turn a profit.
Our founders decided that for the longest time that we weren't going to get into the ad business. However, I think the breakthrough idea came when we said, look, why don't we just show ads that are purely text-based and doesn't have any, moving images or distracting stuff.
Based on the search, Google would provide simple ads for people to click through. So in October 2000, Google embarked on a new business, online advertising. Almost immediately, ad money started to flood in, and pressure grew on Larry and Sergey from their venture capitalist investors. They wanted an experienced CEO to run the place. Larry and Sergey chose a seasoned veteran of the tech world, Eric Schmidt. He had successfully run software maker Novell, and before that, he was with Sun Microsystems. But perhaps what was more important for the founders was that he shared with them a background as a computer science engineer, married to a strong entrepreneurial drive.
Well, Google has taken the position that creativity occurs from individual entrepreneurs deep inside the company, often who have an idea but don't have time to work on it. So we invented a concept called 20% time. And every technical person in the company is supposed to, and we encourage them, to spend 20% of their professional time on things that they find interesting, not things that we find interesting.
Employee number 23, Paul Buckheit, who is the originator of the motto, "Don't be evil," was also the engineer who in just one day came up with Gmail, an email program used internally by Googlers.
There were a lot of objections to even doing Gmail in the first place, but one of the big ones was that there was no way to make money with email. So there was this idea that had been floating around that maybe we could do targeted advertising. For example, if you get an email about a ski trip, you'll get maybe an advertisement for ski equipment or gloves or something like that.
He decided to try writing some code to see if it was possible for Google computers to scan the Gmail messages and spit out an appropriate ad.
When I arrived the next day, people were pretty excited about it, and not always in a positive way. Some people thought that it was actually a terrible idea.
What I recall from the meetings, which occurred over about a year, was this constant debate of what kinds of features would advertising work and so forth. And we ultimately decided to try it. And we, in fact, launched Gmail on April 1st. It was seen largely as a joke.
The addition of targeted ads to Gmail in 2004 proved to be no joke, adding to Google's ever-burgeoning bottom line. Google had transformed itself into an advertising money-making machine.
Now, when we talk about